Let's go ahead and get this show started. I'd like to welcome everyone. This is the CEASD Leadership Series. Today, we do have some exciting presenters. Before we turn it over to them, we'd like to recognize our sponsor today. We have two people from Sorensen, and we will let them make a few remarks before we get started. They'll share their wisdom with you. We have Jim Tarango. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. And we have Elena Shapiro. Thank you both for joining us today. I will turn myself off screen and let the two of you take it away. Do you need to share screen? Looks like yes. So Jim is saying, it sounds like I need to get permission from someone to share that. Do I need to send it to someone? Do you have the PowerPoint? Elena says, I have our PowerPoint. Do you have it, Shauna? Jeff saying, you should be able to share screen. Can you do that? Can you share screen? Shauna's saying, I don't have the PowerPoint, no. There we go. Can everyone see that, hopefully? Okay, I'm hoping that everyone can see that. Okay, and now we're both pinned. Okay, who is going to advance this for us? So you should be able to see the Wavelo page. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jim Tarango. I cover the Midwest. I'm from New York State. I do have Elena with me, so thank you so much for developing the PowerPoint we're using today. Elena contributed that, so I appreciate it. As many of you may be aware of or not, we do have Wavelo. We are showing that here. And Wavelo is great for teachers to use with students. If they're calling their parents, then the parents can actually download the app. Once they have Wavelo, it would be like a phone call that the teacher sets up through an interpreter. And so you would have then the callers on both sides with the interpreter. You could use ASL or English. You could also have a Spanish interpreter. So it's great for students who speak Spanish, and Wavelo then allows for face-to-face with the parents to talk about homework, if there's a disciplinary issue. It could be an IEP meeting. If the parents are not able to participate in person, Wavelo would allow them to join the meeting in a way. And you could, again, do that with either Spanish or with an ASL interpreter. So Wavelo is for hearing people to download, so they would be the ones using the app. Elena, anything you want to add on to that? Elena's saying the only thing I would add on to that is that deaf people don't have to download that. It's already built into all of the rest of the software. If you have the Sorensen apps, you already have all of that. So if you've already downloaded it, then once you are in and ready to make a call, you see enter, then you will be able to click the W and the screen will change so that you're able to use the interpreter that goes with the Wavelo app. Then you can see both people on the screen, the interpreter and the person you're calling with Wavelo. Hi, I'm Elena. I'm the district manager for the Northeast New England area. We do have a corporate directory, and some schools use that, others do not. The purpose of that is to feed in all of the names of your employees. You would have them in your directory, and it would show up in your contacts. You could have contacts, favorites, and then underneath that, a listing of the directory. If you do that, it's not just for those who have a VP, but you could include hearing staff and their telephone numbers. If it's someone that you're in touch with regularly by phone, all of those could be saved into your phone. So that directory is something that you can set up by sending an email to our team. You just need to give us information about the phone numbers, and then we can upload that anytime. It's a nice feature to have, especially if for example, if there's an organization where they're not using the individual person's name, they're using a company name or position, like counselor. Sometimes people aren't sure who they're reaching, so the directory allows you to put the name in addition to that so everyone can identify who they're in touch with. Just adding with the directory, you would then have two phone books, personal and then directory. So the directory is standardized throughout the organization or school, and then you would still have personal, which could include things like your children's school or things like that. But the personal is nice because other people don't see it. So you still can keep those contacts that you individually need to maintain and also have what your organization or school establishes for the directory available. One of the nice things about group call and transfer call, called transfer, we actually have a third feature here, work remotely, and these are very good. Let's say there's a teacher who is working on a project. Maybe you have 10 students in a class doing a research project together. They can then use this group call to call each other, up to 16 people. And that could include the teacher as well as the students all on the screen having a conversation in ASL, talking about who's researching which component of the project, who's handling which aspect of that. So it's very nice to have that. You can do it for a homework tool. You can also use it for a kind of pen pal or video pen pals. You can be in touch with other schools or have group conversations across different schools or organizations. You can also have different people join if you want to have a joint class, someone that's teaching with students from different places, and kill multiple birds with one stone, so to speak. So it's nice to have that group call up to 16 people. The next is call transfer. So let's say someone's calling and talking to me, but that's actually not the person they need to reach out to. They need to be in touch with the head of school or superintendent. I can use call transfer to get them over to the right department. So that's a nice feature. And hopefully, as COVID numbers are going down, one of the things that's nice is that we are seeing that trend. But if you have someone that has a video phone and a laptop and a mobile device and an iPad, it allows those 4 devices to be unified with one call number in the system. So let's say you're teaching in Zoom or something else, you can then work remotely and do that from home or in a different office. If you're not based in one particular place, let's say you're at Starbucks or the airport, then you have this ability to work from wherever you are because of the unified devices. It allows for more ease of working remotely. Anything you'd like to add, Elena? I'll just add on for the call transfer. The other benefit of that is, let's say you have someone who works in a front desk position, but you actually have several people that are functioning in the answering the phone capacity. So you can have it so that everyone's logged in, and after that call gets directed to that first person, you can transfer it to other people who could field those calls. For the work remotely, if you have a home office, then you could set up a secondary VP at home and still get your calls routed there. If you're using more than one office in the same school or organization, maybe you have different satellite locations or offices, you could standardize so that wherever you are, the same number be used for everything. So that's very nice to have that benefit. Okay, so for any questions, this is Jim. If there's any questions you need to reach out to someone, I can forward these slides to all of you so that your administrators have this at each of your schools. We do have sales district managers, and this map shows you, as you can see, my area is the yellow part. Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, you can see all of the yellow area. You can also see as far south as Missouri. If you have any questions, since we've given this presentation, if you'd like us to do that for your school or any kind of training or working with your staff or students related to Wavelo, helping parents to download the Wavelo app, understanding better how it works or best practices for using those other features like call transfer that I mentioned, if you need any support for any of that, we'd be happy to work with you. You can contact the appropriate district manager based on where you're located, and you could also contact Elena or I. Or if you have a contact within Sorensen, we can make sure you get connected to the appropriate district manager. Anything, Elena, you'd like to add? No. Okay, so in wrapping up, I think that's all that we had to share. So I can turn it over to you, Elena, saying, unless you have any questions. Do you have any questions for us? Mrs. Shauna, thank you so much for being with us today and for your brief presentation. This is great to see all of the new advances in science and technology. I didn't know about the call transfer, so very cool to learn about that. Jim's adding, I just wanted to mention as well that many of us, for the district managers, we will be attending CEASD. So of course, if you'd like to meet with us individually, we will see you all there. We'll be in Salt Lake City. Safe travels and happy St. Patrick's Day. Have a wonderful weekend. Elena saying thank you so much for having us today. Okay, let's take the screen sharing down. I think we're ready for that. Okay, hello and good morning or good afternoon, depending on wherever you are. I'm Shauna Bilyeu, and I'm a board member at CEASD. I wanted to welcome you all today. We do have two presenters from Gallaudet University, and they are ready to talk to us today about school improvement. Our first presenter is Dr. Tangi Apana. I'm not sure if I spelled that correctly there. Tangi Apana. And our second presenter is John Serrano. Dr. Apana is an associate professor at Gallaudet University in the School of Language and Education and Culture. She also worked as a middle school teacher and an elementary school principal at ASD. In addition, she taught deaf students in South Africa. Very cool. Next is John Serrano, who's the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Gallaudet University. He previously worked as an administrator at the Atlanta Area School for the Deaf, the AASD, and has also worked at the Texas School for the Deaf. John lives in Maryland with his wife, Melly, and their 3 children. Please help me welcome the 2 of them. I'm looking forward to hearing their presentation today. Everyone is always working towards the goal of school improvement, so we're happy to have you here.
Okay, let's get the spotlight. Yes, let me close my screen. Thank you for the warm introduction. All right, 1 second, everyone. Hi, good morning. Oh, hold on. There we go. Good afternoon. Thank you for the nice introduction, John. And I am looking forward to presenting today as well.
Great. Yes. Hi, everyone. I will start by sharing my screen. I do have a PowerPoint for today.
Okay, let's go ahead and take on school improvement strategies and their impact and student learning. There are some objectives today. We want to provide a safe space for addressing these things. First, how to develop needed assessments for student performance at their school. Developing a plan to identify and implement evidence-based strategies based on the needs assessment. And then we'll share how to develop a professional development based on student needs.
Great. I will add on to that Tangi and I both acknowledge that we are not currently working in a K-12 system. Tangi was a principal and an educator. I was a superintendent, and now we're both at Gallaudet. So we are going to share some of our experience and offer what we can. But it's especially a time and a space for all of you to discuss school improvement. Thinking about today and post-pandemic, which I'm not really sure it technically is post-pandemic. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're having these conversations with that in mind for all of you to share your ideas, your experience, what you're doing, what's worked for you. If you can have any kind of tips and guidance to share with each other, that's the goal of the conversation today. School improvement strategies in the past and today may look very different. So we want to be considerate of the various factors and the ways that we are impacted by COVID.
So I'd like to share this from Libby Bonesteel. She is a superintendent in Vermont. And she talks about—
Wrote for the ASDC Smart Brief.
Thank you. And she wrote about the impact of the pandemic. And that was in December of 2021. But regardless, teachers and students are back to the classroom in real life this year. In Vermont, the school board members they realized that there weren't enough cleaning staff to clean up the school at their school. And also in Nevada, the principals were involved in cleaning the hallways and working in the classroom because they were short of teachers. And one principal was cleaning the bathrooms. So that means in survival, we have to look at how all the schools are running and be careful of a lot of other things as well.
Yes, and like Dr. Aperna just mentioned, I'm sure we can't see you, but you're probably nodding along as she just described that. It's probably something you can relate to in your own experiences. Thinking about how you keep the school running, how you maintain that, what's going on in the classrooms, the individual needs for students, their families, as well as for staff. But for all of those components, it's been a survival year. If you don't already subscribe to the Smart Brief with ASDC Smart Brief, we really encourage you to take advantage of that resource. There's lots of good articles and information in there. Okay, so now we'll get into really talking about how things have changed, how schools are run, many of the issues that have been brought to the forefront in COVID, including student mental health, and not just students, but staff as well, thinking about their well-being. Also, the staff shortages. Thinking additionally about students with disabilities, with additional disabilities, and whether or not they're getting equitable services. At the beginning of COVID, with remote learning, there were significant challenges for students in our schools, thinking about how to support them in their needs. We've also all been facing financial difficulties. If you're receiving federal funds, has that been impacted? What's the impact on families? Have they lost employment? Has that changed their financial picture at home? Does that change anything related to instruction, going to remote instruction and then in-person instruction? And December and January, COVID numbers were going back up because of Omicron, which meant going back to remote. And the changing mode of instruction has really had an impact. And going back and forth between that over the last 2 years has been a challenge. Also seeing challenges in substitute teachers, people being burnt out, having multiple vacancies that aren't filled, meaning classrooms are understaffed and needing to have people come into the classroom and provide that coverage that otherwise wouldn't, having a principal in the classroom. And each of these has had an impact, all specific to the last 2 years of COVID. There are other issues as well that this slide doesn't cover. Teacher burnout. And one of the things we're thinking about in school climates right now is how divisive it feels. There's a protocol, a process set up, and maybe families disagree, or there's disagreement at the legislative level. And all of these disagreements can be divisive when we should all be working towards serving students, and our administrators are working towards that. But it's hard to balance all of these at the same time. I presented a number of different issues, but I'm sure this is not comprehensive. So you may have other issues on your radar that you'd like to include. To be able to capture that, we do have a poll, and we encourage you to either do the poll if you can, or respond in the chat if that's more available to you. Think about things we have not mentioned yet, but that you've been facing since COVID, and add those in here. Okay, does anyone have anything to add here? You can come on screen if you'd like to, otherwise you do have the chat. You can do it either way. No, it doesn't seem like it. Okay, so that will be a good segue to then doing our breakout groups. Oh, were you adding something, Tangi?
Yes, there were two things in the chat, two issues.
Okay, I do see the first one, staff preferring the virtual environment. That's a challenge. So yeah. Going to virtual and then coming back to being in person, there was some resistance to that, to coming back. So I'm wondering about dealing with that if you're thinking about student needs versus staff needs and how you balance both of those. The next comment was about lower enrollment. And then there's a comment after that. The schedule itself, shorter days during COVID and having a hard time getting back to the full regular schedule after having that adjusted. The next struggle is about students transitioning back to being in the classroom after having a little more flexibility on their own at home to thinking about being back in the classroom, and what are some of the underlying issues that are impacting that, learning, social issues, some of those things. Students who are getting addicted to the technology, hooked to being on the screen. And that's not just students, but we're seeing that with adults too. Having federal money to spend, having a lot of funds available, but a lot of restrictions and red tape, lots of hoops to jump through to be able to get that for staff, those funds. So there's a lot of things being shared here in the chat. That's great. We are going to go into a breakout rooms. And we're going into just 2 groups because we have 2 interpreters. So we're going to have 10 minutes with an interpreter in each group. And we're going to have a conversation about some of these challenges that you're facing in your schools as a result of COVID. Tangi, I think we're ready if you want to set up those breakout rooms.
Okay, I'll do that now.
Great. 1 second. Okay.
Well, I'd like to say that we had an interesting discussion. We wanted to stay at our breakout group and continue talking.
Yeah, yep.
We really saw how teachers and school leaders were really hurt when, well, we already know what's happening and what the needs are.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed is that we're really not alone in this. It's not just schools for the deaf, but public schools are facing these issues. So how we're serving deaf and hard of hearing students is different in terms of a language accessible environment and how critical that is. We are seeing, and this will tie into the next part of our presentation related to school improvement strategies, that how we view school improvement is different than it was in the past. So if we're talking about the now what, looking ahead, what do we do now? Do we keep things the same? Do we address and make changes? And I'm curious if we can all learn from each other related to that.
Yes. We'll talk about needs assessment. I know all of you are familiar with this topic, dealing with students, with their achievement, where they are ongoing. So first, why we need a needs assessment and what students get from that. Previously, we could give an assessment and then figure it out. Say, okay, let's look at the score. And it was a lot easier. But now there are a lot of other things that we are dealing with. So we're assessing needs and systemic needs. So that means you can't only work with one group of students. And we say, okay, what are we going to do today for these students? And we'll try it, get some data, and look at the assessment and see how they're doing with reading. You have to figure out what the challenges are, and it becomes very complicated. So the whole process needs to involve all of the stakeholders. Teachers, teachers' assistants, professional staff, families, leadership.
And as we're reconsidering all of this, using an equity lens that has been increasingly focused on thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI work, is so critical. We can't separate that from the rest of the process we're going through. We need to have that underlying and embedded with everything else. Are we making a culturally appropriate response? Are we considering their belief, values, and experience? How are we doing that with staff, with students, with the community? And paying attention throughout to filtering that as we're making new policies, new procedures to be culturally responsive. This depends as well on having the right data that reflects the students that we're working with. So keeping in mind an equity lens.
So in discussion with the pandemic, we're in 2022 now. We're thinking about the pandemic being in the past. Coming back to school, we've noticed more issues have come up. Before the pandemic, we know that deaf students already had a gap in reading and writing. But now we're back from 2 years of some real tough experiences, and those gaps have widened. There are also other factors that are impacting learning. Some of those we've discussed. So reading and writing and academic work. Having talked about those, let's put those aside for just a moment and talk about some of the life issues we're seeing. We're seeing anxiety and depression in students, teachers, school leadership. A lot of teachers have left the profession. We're seeing cyberbullying and overdependence on social media. We all know that social media is not helping the situation, right? We've seen an increase in child abuse and neglect. Before, some students were safe because they came to school during the day, but then they were stuck at home and it was a very negative environment for some students. Increase in neglect as well. Because of family obligations, maybe they're not able to pay their rent, maybe they weren't able to buy food, and so child neglect happened. So children went on the computer and did the same thing, and maybe they saw things that weren't appropriate, and that caused some issues. And also family losing their jobs and not being able to make ends meet. If we need a needs assessment for success, here are some things that we need. It has to be very content specific. We can't copy other schools because their needs are different. But we can gather ideas from other schools and then modify that to fit the school, your school. Of course, you must have data. You can't think and say, okay, we're going to do this. You have to have data to follow. And of course, you have to involve all stakeholders. Before we mentioned families, teachers, teachers' aides, professional staff, leadership. Everyone needs to be aware, and everyone needs to know each step in the process as well. And then finally, after collecting that data, we have to bring the data together and collaborate and identify areas of improvement. Principals can't decide on their own. They have to have input from teachers and staff and professional staff.
Great.
So how do we keep everyone connected in this process? At teacher and staff meetings, bring the results of the survey. Maybe decide 3 goals together and have a discussion and allow the teachers to talk about it because they are the first face of the students. Then once you've decided what the results, share with stakeholders. That would be family and support staff and students. They have to be included as well. You can include higher level elementary students, high school students. Allow them to participate as well. Then from the results, decide the priority. Remember, you can't fix every issue in one chance. You need to focus on one at a time.
I'll add in here in terms of the stakeholders, thinking about that share out process. In COVID, there was a bit of a silver lining. Pre-COVID, often schools were not really thinking about how to incorporate people. They were thinking face-to-face meetings. When do we have a coffee chat? Which night can we do this so that people can be there? And it was a challenge for families as a stakeholder to really participate if it had to be after work hours. Since COVID, we've become a lot more savvy with things like Zoom, with virtual meetings, and now thinking how many other ways there are to include people. It could be a hybrid model where there's some people who are meeting in the physical space and other people are on a remote option. I know people are tired of Zoom, myself included, but it does have a good tool, is a tool available for us and something that we can use to incorporate people who might not be able to be there in person.
So how do you do an actual needs assessment? I know many of you school leaders here have experienced this before, I know, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but you need to have data. So first is a survey. It's simple. Maybe just start with 3 things, not 10, and ask each teacher and professional staff to name 3 top areas based on their experience. And then from those results, you can set 3 goals. Remember, doing it together. Get the results together and collaborate and discuss. You can use Google Forms. You can use that for a survey. And then the data will be automatically calculated for you.
Also, when you're doing the survey, consider not just limiting the survey to staff, but thinking about the data being collected from students. Or do you have student achievement data? Do you have social emotional data? What are all the different types of data you can be collecting or have collected, and how can you see that holistically so that you're looking at all the data together? Almost as you're identifying those priorities and goals, thinking about all of that. And as Dr. Appana mentioned, if you're starting with 3 is not the magic number. If you want to do 2 or 5, whatever makes sense, just focus on having them be realistic and attainable. You don't want to have 10 or 15 things. So you want it to be achievable within a particular time frame.
Yes.
We are going to go back out into those breakout groups and think about the needs for your school. How are you determining those? Sharing some ideas with each other. And Dr. Appana, can you go ahead and set up those groups?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we're back. Thank you for the group discussion, the breakout rooms. People were talking about their experience and needs assessments, what things they're putting in place. Some people are sending out surveys. Some are making some adjustments to how they're doing that in light of COVID and the impact of that. So the goal really to have that space for conversation is what we're eager to continue doing. So that's what that conversation was good. Oh, I forgot to share screen. Give me a moment.
Okay.
This is you. Oh. Okay. So now that you've collected data, then what? So the next topic is professional development. So PD. I don't need to go into a lot of explanation about what PD is. Everyone's familiar, but figuring out what it looks like and going forward, what it will look like. What are some best practices around that? In my experience working in K-12, which I did for a long time, there were often so many needs, so many things, all of which were important, that we really had to try hard to focus on the top needs, identifying the top priorities, just a couple of them. And part of that, identifying the top 3 needs, would have a ripple effect, and those would impact other things that were also needs that we've identified that are valuable. So looking at PD could be bringing in an outside presenter, someone external to do a training. It could also be someone within the school community, maybe a teacher sharing best practices, things that are working, techniques or approaches they're using. But creating professional learning communities is another opportunity. So we're going to share more about that on the next slide. And not just thinking about academic areas for professional development, but social emotional skills. And in today's climate, that's so important. We really need to be focusing on our students and their social emotional needs. I have a quote up here to share with all of you. I'll give you a moment to read it. Keeping in mind as school leaders that we cannot lead the schools alone. We have to work together, work with each other. And that doesn't just mean having one person at a time, providing some support, but really working together, taking advantage of each other's strengths. And that's really what the professional learning communities are geared at doing. Focusing on sharing information with each other. And this quote comes from Michael Fullen. Go ahead.
Okay. I know sometimes it feels like we're preaching to the choir because there are a lot of school leaders among you. And I'm thinking too at the beginning, we should have in the chat talked about who you all are to see how many of you are teachers or leaders. But the discussion has been really interesting. And it's already given me some clues as to who you are as far as school leaders or teachers. So building a professional learning community, how do you do that? Schools already have a list of things that they need to do. So first you have to develop meaningful teams. And that happens after professional development that John talked about. So professional learning and professional development doesn't stop. You have to continue that training. You have to really collaborate, discuss the learning process, try to reflect on how what you've learned will be applied for your classrooms. School leaders can help provide a time for teams to collaborate. Maybe a common preparation time could be used. Using teacher meeting time, maybe every other week. Have the team get together to talk about what they've learned from professional development and how they plan to implement it, or what supports they need. School leaders need to clarify the work needs. It has to be clear goals for teachers to follow. Monitoring of the teams needs to be done. Figuring out where struggles are happening, what's needed, and then provide that support. Obviously, collecting data during the time of these discussions. And it's important for teachers to share and say, you know, my students are reading a paragraph, and celebrate any small win. Maybe that can be done during morning group or whatever it is the school can celebrate. You have to recognize not just the tough time and the negative times included in this. We also have to include those celebrations.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on to that as well. In terms of celebrating the small wins, be mindful that we can have fun with this, supporting the school environment. Sometimes we are so focused on the work, we need to set time aside to have fun, something that we enjoy. That in itself is helpful to allow people to reset. We do have needs for that, thinking about self-care and mental health. And if we are under too much stress, that's something we have to be aware of in this field. It does have an impact on students. That ties very nicely into this next slide, which is coping with social emotional needs. We have seen those numbers really increase since COVID. The needs around mental health for students and for teachers, and for staff needs in general, including ourselves. The key is to really start by leading with compassion. Be mindful of their needs. Take time to pause in the process. Sometimes you just have to step in and take a step back, go back a few steps, and think about what really needs the attention in that moment. In the old days, we couldn't do that. We just had to keep plowing through it, but we can't afford to do that anymore. Are the needs being met? Are we on top of all of the demands in the school? So being mindful about that. Also encouraging mindfulness practices for yourself, for others, for students, for families. You can also bring in outside experts. We can't afford for the school to be separate from the community anymore. We need to really have much more integration of expertise. Is there a mental health need? Then why can't we support staff learning about that? And that is more important now than ever.
Next is using effective pedagogy to improve student learning. We know the concept of collaborative learning, and all of you know about the zone of proximal development. Learning about yourself alone so much, but taking a moment to discuss it with another person, your learning increases. So encourage teachers to use groups, maybe pair students and learn together.
The next item here is culturally responsive teaching and learning. So that goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's so important to be thinking with an equity lens. We can't have any of these items stand alone. We need to have equity embedded in everything we do. Professional development, instruction, culturally responsive instruction. We need to make sure that we're thinking about each of these through an equity lens. Our staffing needs, the community as well. It could be things like the curriculum, resources, materials that we're using. Are they reflective of the students? Do they see themselves in those materials? What about the instruction we're using? Are staff reflected there? What are the policies and practices in place? Are they outdated? Do they need attention? Are they marginalizing particular groups? These are some of the questions we need to ask ourselves so that we can identify and break systems down that need to be rebuilt.
Including principles of universal design for learning. During the pandemic, we had the Wow Ross School for the Deaf talk about UDL.
I presented at the Willie Ross School for the Deaf.
Oh, thank you. And they have my PowerPoint on the website. It is really focused on design and how to apply UDL. It is very helpful. It shows how to break down similar goals and include UDL activities and making sure that you're matching the needs for your students. And we'll add some materials and the references at the end on the reference page. CEASD is the big organization for UDL. And we'll add their toolkit website. Also, incorporating differentiated instruction is important.
Great. This will be our third and final breakout session. Based on the conversations we've been having so far, think about your own professional development needs, how you're identifying those needs, what it looks like, and take this opportunity to share those resources with each other. We'll go ahead if you want to set those up. Okay, got to make all the settings work for us. I think we have that all figured out. All right. Okay. Great.
Yes, great discussion again.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, the opportunity to hear from different people what strategies they're doing. Do they have professional development built into the schedule? Some things that they're adding that are new this year. Everyone had a little bit of a different position with it. Some are having a hybrid model, doing some in person, also some remote. Yeah, there was a real mix. And professional learning, in some cases, it's almost nothing, just to try to keep the school doors open and things, just the survival mode. So some people will do more of that again next year.
Yes. Right, being away from the classroom and being away from the school. I've learned a lot through these participants.
Okay, we are winding down. We have 10 minutes remaining. So just to summarize some of the things we've talked about. As any good teacher does, you start with the objectives and you wrap up with the review with some summary. So in the conversations today, thinking about what's come out of COVID, what the impact has been on student learning, thinking about that for students, families, staff. Also, what are the benefits? In what ways are we taking needs assessments and improving what things will look like post-COVID? As we're collecting data, analyzing and identifying needs, well, collecting the data first, and then prioritizing the goals based on the assessment, and then determining what professional learning, professional development needs to be in place to help grow in those areas. Do we need to be culturally responsive? What can we do? So talking about some of those things today. So in closing, really the purpose was not for the two of us to share wisdom with you so much as providing this space. You have a lot of tools to have that opportunity to share them with each other and listen and hear from each other. We were looking forward to hearing from you. Some things are working and going well. Some things have needed to be changed, and rerouting some things, thinking new about what the new norms are. Also, COVID is not far from over in terms of we will be living with it. But what do? We have these needs are still here. We're still serving our students. How can we respond to their needs? Anything you'd like to add, Tangi?
Well, I'd like to see if we have any questions. Maybe you could type them in the chat if you have a question.
I do want to pull up that next slide. We mentioned references, so let's give us an opportunity to show that. And the PowerPoint will be distributed. If there's something that came up in the presentation, if there's a reference or tools or things you'd like to have, feel free to take advantage of that.
I do want to add something as well. I'm thinking about school leaders, thinking about some sort of opportunity to discuss with each other. I know that we can't do it in person, but maybe a chat group where we can really learn from each other. Kind of the same idea that we've noticed today, people sharing some ideas. There were some very unique ideas that we talked about. But maybe some sort of chat group or something that could be set up from CEASD. Maybe you have that already and I'm not aware, but I think it would be a great opportunity to collaborate with each other.
It's true, and more than ever, there was an article, that first article, the superintendent from Vermont, who said it's been a survival year. But really reading that, thinking about mowing the lawn outside, changing the toilet paper, the number of things that have been on our radar, trying to take care of all of this and students, and it really has been so much work. So we appreciate everything you've been doing and your time with us today. And that, I think we can wrap up. Should I turn it back over to Shauna? Should you be spotlighted? There we go. Oh, okay. Thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate both of your time. Thank you, John and Tangi. We also will have to continue this recovery for a long time, as you said. It will be ongoing. And as a reminder, we are going to continue this conversation at the conference in Salt Lake City, April 22nd through the 24th. We hope to see you all in person there. And we're not doing it remote. We're going to be in person together. This is our next to last content session. We will have one more after the conference, and that's in May. The other webinars are related to the strategic planning. I believe that's true that we have March and then just one more next week.
No. This is our last session until the CEASD conference.
All right.
Then after the conference, we'll have one more. We'll do a webinar and then a final town hall to kind of recap the year.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody. Great presentation today. Nice to see you.
Okay, thank you. John saying, see you all in Salt Lake.
Bye-bye.